All right, so it's a weekend and Mr. D doesn't stop thinking science stuff, even though it's more outdoor stuff. Mr. D thinks nonstop, but I'm out here on a friend's property doing some habitat work for him, and I'm in an area that, in my opinion, is the best cover for wildlife. Like we talked about, anytime you do some sort of disturbance, you know that we talked about. Anybody able to tell me what that is called when you cause a disturbance? Whether it be wind blows down a big section of forest, a forest fire, Mr. D with a chainsaw. Mr. D's kind of like a tornado or the Tasmanian devil. I kind of blow through things if I would come in and knock all these trees down. Anything like that, a bulldozer. That's right, hopefully one of you said succession. So not primary succession, but secondary succession. So I'm out here, and this area on this person's property, she told me when I first came and looked at the property to do some work on it, I said, boy, that back corner looks good. I love her goal is habitat or wildlife. She wants to improve seeing wildlife on her property. And she has a lot of big, tall, beautiful, mature timber over by her house, but in this back corner, it's just this scrubby, brushy stuff. You can see down there, actually some hazelnut bushes, a little bit of invasive species like we talked about we could clear out, but honestly, in this area, it's not terrible. But just real shrubby, scrubby area. Now, it is winter, and so it doesn't look as thick as what it might, but it's ready to have a little work done to it. So if I walk up here, you can see there's vegetation on the ground that they can eat. Now, you'll notice this area that I'm looking at right now is very, very different looking than back here, all right? That is because this area has no trees. Where the sunlight hits the ground, on the ground it can photosynthesize, and that makes these kind of plants grow. Well, if you're a deer, you don't want your supper plate up on top of the roof, right? Well, that's where with these big trees, that's where those stems are. So here's some stems down here, but these aren't really this year's growth stems, and that's what deer eat. This year's stuff is up there at the top of the tree, and it's not doing any good for wildlife. Deer live at 4 feet and below. So this, you can see where the tracks start, this kind of cover is what you want. All right, there's some coralberry in here, blackberries, just thorns and briars, and it's perfect. Now, you'll notice over here, we have a lot of early successional plants, pioneer plants, the first plants to come into an area after a disturbance, which I thought was interesting. She told me when I told her I like this area that her husband had long ago, he's since passed on, brought a bulldozer back here and pushed some of this out to try to develop it or maybe build a house back here or something. There was a plan for it. And so if you look at these trees, these are all probably, I would guess this house, well, I can remember coming over here to this area with my dad. I don't know if it was when they built this house or my dad and her husband at one point were looking at building houses or something back in this property. Maybe it was this little area, I don't know. And they didn't end up doing it, but you know, this house is probably 30 years old, or at least this was done 30 years ago. So most of these trees are about that age. Now we can see some great trees like walnuts here, all right? And you can tell that it's a pretty closed off forest up in this area because there's no branches on the trees until you get real high. There's no branches on the trees low because the low branches can't photosynthesize because they don't get sun, all right? But what I would do in this forest is come through, and all these big giant thorny trees, those are honey locusts, all right? I would girdle all of those. Remember how we said if you cut that cambium layer and stop the blood flow, just like the circulatory system in our body, stop that blood flow and treat it with chemical, those trees are all dead. When you release those trees, these great straight trees like this, that, you know, this tree, once it gets to be about 18 inches, is a $600-700 tree if she would ever log it, and it produces nuts for wildlife. The others do nothing, and they're an early successional plant. So what you're doing is speeding up succession, all right, by cutting or killing all of these junk trees and letting these better ones grow. Same thing with, I saw one a minute ago, a split tree like that. That walnut has two a V in it, okay? Well, I can look over here, and right here, there's one that is nice and straight. So I would probably cut the one that has a V and leave the one that is straight, because all the nutrients and all the sun and all the water will be going to that tree and it'll grow faster. So just a little connection to what we've been talking about. My phone's gonna die, so I better shut this off or I'll lose the whole video. But this is a really cool cover and a prime example of some of the stuff we've been talking about. All right, it's a weekend. I'm getting off here. No more school. See ya!